Good evening. Before we continue with what's listed in the banquet program at your seat, we have one final award of merit to present this weekend. This recipient was a late addition to our lineup, as his work schedule kept him extremely busy, and we were very fortunate to have him here with us tonight, where I'm going to present him with the Linus Pauling Award of Merit in Science. This award is named for Brother Linus Pauling, Ohio State, 1922. It says Ohio right here. Okay, wherever he's from. It was in 1922. Who's the only but this is, I bet this is right, who is the only person to be the sole recipient of 2 Nobel Prizes. These awards were in chemistry in 1954 and peace in 1962. Brother Pauling was a brilliant man. Today's recipient is also a trailblazer in his field. I'm pleased to present this award to Joe Schoendorf, Purdue, 1966. Brother Schoendorf has been active in the technology industry for over 4 decades. He's been a partner at Accel since 1988, a venture capital firm that has helped companies start and grow their businesses. If you're not familiar with Accel, it has worked with companies including Facebook, Slack, Venmo, Spotify, and many others. Joe also currently serves as a strategic partner at the World Economic Forum and is a sought-after speaker and collaborator. In fact, he is currently working on a Tech for Good project with dozens of other tech CEOs and French President Emmanuel Macron. Prior to joining Accel, Joe's past positions included serving as the Vice President of Marketing for Apple Computer, Executive Vice President for Worldwide Sales and Marketing at Ungerman Bass, CEO of Industrial Networking, and an 18-year career prior to that with Hewlett-Packard. Joe is a graduate of Purdue University and has served on the Dean's Advisory Council at that school. Please join me in recognizing this outstanding Delta Upsilon brother, Joe Schoendorf, with the Linus Pauling Award of Merit in Science.
I guess there was a reason you got a Hoosier to introduce a Purdue Boilermaker. I'm a baseball fan, and I'm a New York Yankees fan, tried and true. And one of the things I listen to on YouTube is Gehrig Speech when he's dying, and he talks about how he's the luckiest man in the world. And I often seriously think that I feel the same way. I hope I'm not dying. But I am. I hope we got a long way to go. Here I am at Purdue, and I'm in the lab, and I'm using some Hewlett-Packard gear, and my partner says to me, they're going to interview on campus next week. I'd never heard of the company, but I like the gear. And it's 20 degrees below zero in Indiana, as it is that time of the year, and they invite me out for an interview. And I'm in Palo Alto at the end of January, and I wake up in front of this motel they put me in Palo Alto, and there's an orange tree outside with oranges on it, and it's 65 degrees in the morning. And I said, I don't care whether they make me an offer or not, I'm going to live here. It wasn't called Silicon Valley yet. And that was pure luck. And I spent time, and I don't want to go through my career. What I wanted to share with you tonight are kind of 2 different things. One, what advice would I give you that if my 2 daughters were sitting here, they would agree with? I have a 30-year-old daughter and a 35-year-old daughter. One of them is on her second startup. They don't always listen to the advice we give them. And I'm going to tell you an important story about how much the world in Silicon Valley has changed. so that you'll get the point I'm going to give you when I tell you what I think the advice is that I want you to take away tonight. My daughter, my youngest daughter, went to Princeton, got a double E degree, went to China, learned Mandarin, taught electrical engineering in Singapore, went to Stanford, got a double E degree in master in computer architecture. I used to give her a lot of crap about you got to get an education that's going to let you get a good job. And, you know, we had fun with that. So she's graduating from Stanford, and she's sitting there at dinner with Mom and I. What you need to know about me is, you know, I've been in venture capital for 30 years. So has her mother. Her mother runs a competitor firm to mine. So we've watched Silicon Valley grow up, and we've invested in scores of companies. And she's sitting there saying, I want to do a startup. And we listened to her, and Mom said, well, have you considered Facebook or Google? When Nancy had worked before venture capital, she had worked for Eric Schmidt at Sun. And Eric's a good friend. And now he's running Google. So we'll call him up. Sheryl Sandberg or Facebook. Why don't you go to Facebook? She said to me, Mom, Dad, you don't get it. That's the favorite thing I hear from her. I don't get it. And I said, what don't I get this time? She said, why would I want to, this is 3 years ago. Why would I want to go to work for Facebook or Google? Those are old companies. Old companies. My wife and I nearly fell out of our chair. And she went to work for a startup. Didn't tell us about it. Fortunately, when she told me the name of the company, I went, oh, wow, we just invested in that about 3 months ago. I called my partner and figured out she had done a good thing. So the advice that I'm going to give all of the brothers here is the same advice I gave both of my daughters. Given how the world has changed, and the amount of change you're going to see in the next 50 years is going to be many orders of magnitude more than what I've lived in my life. If you want a job, start a company. Most of the jobs that are going to be created in the West, and I suspect everywhere, over your productive lifetime, are going to be from startup companies that deal with the whole range of new technologies. And getting into that world, you know, I hate to tell you this, but if you look at the top 5 companies when I graduated, they were the General Electrics and General Motors and General this and General that. And if you look at the top 5 companies today, they're the Apples and the Amazons and the Facebooks and the Microsofts, et cetera, et cetera. And those companies, for the most part, didn't exist 20 years ago. And 20 years from now, if I'm standing here, there are going to be 5 companies that are probably different than that, and most of them have not yet started. So that's the rate of change we're going through. Get used to that as an entrepreneur. Just to put a bubble in your balloon, does anybody, and you heard me say this earlier, some of you, so if you answered it earlier, don't. Look at 3 of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world in our lifetime: Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates. You know what they have in common? They wouldn't be sitting in a room like this having spent 4 years in college. They didn't go to college. Steve washed out of Reed College in his freshman year, and Bill Gates and Mark dropped out of Harvard, you know, early in their sophomore year. So it really is about your entrepreneurial skill. Second point I want to make is I tried to think on the plane down here, what is the single most important thing I've learned in 50 years in Silicon Valley? And one thing just stood out in my mind. I had the benefit of working for Hewlett-Packard when Bill and Dave were still running the company. And one day I got promoted to a general manager's job. The general manager at HP had P&L responsibility. That means I affected in some small way earnings per share. And in order to get that job, I had to go to a 1-week course that was taught only by the vice presidents of Hewlett-Packard, most of whom had been there for their entire careers. And the last guy who talked at the last session was Dave Packard, 6'8", had built one of the most successful companies ever, And he comes in and he says to us, all right, you've now got some P&L responsibility. We're all new at that job. He said, you're going to run into financial problems. Some of your businesses are going to get into trouble. He says, our policy is we'll give you 2 years to fix a business which is in financial trouble. Give us a plan, we'll work with you for 8 quarters to get back on track. 2 years. Then he says, if you're having problems managing your people, we have the same rule. We'll give you 2 minutes to fix the problem. Meaning, your success in the job you're going to do is about being a leader for your people. And I took that single lesson away, and if I had one thing that I learned that has probably had the major outcome in terms of what I've been able to do, it ends with the word people and how you work with them. And I think anybody in here who's the brothers of ours that are, closer to my age, I think you'd all shake your head and say yes. And then I thought I'd close with a couple of words about Linus Pauling. I never met him. We have a home in Big Sur. He has a property, or his family does. He lived there. He died in Big Sur. That's probably one of the most remarkable pieces of land in the whole state of California. If I were to say, and I actually was in a dinner party a couple of years, well, actually it was in 1999, Walter Isaacson, he was doing the then running Time magazine, and he said at this dinner party, I need you guys to help me pick the man of the century. Who was the most important person in the world for the 20th century? Came to me and I said, I think it was Shockley. Shockley won the Nobel Prize for the transistor. I don't have to preach about the transistor. We wouldn't be here. There was no internet, there was no anything without the transistor. Well, I think if we go out 50 more years, we're going to look back at what Brother Pauling did with his work in organic chemistry. And while he probably didn't define the helix exactly right, it was the structural work that he did that led to DNA. And if the transistor was the product that created trillions of dollars of value for the world in the 20th century, what we do with DNA and the human genome will create many times more value for the human race in the 21st century. And the science that Brother Pauling did was a core building block of that. Thank you all for this award, and I appreciate it very much.